Welcome to Lighthouse. I'm your host, and today we're venturing into one of the most compelling and well-documented encounters with the unexplained in modern history. Today, I'm honored to welcome our guest who will share with us the remarkable story of Betty and Barney Hill, a middle-aged couple whose late-night drive through rural New Hampshire in 1961 would forever change their lives and shape our cultural understanding of close encounters. So tell me, what exactly happened on that September night that made this case so significant?
Well, it all began on a clear night in September 9. Betty and Barney Hill were an interracial couple in their early 40s. Betty was white and worked as a child welfare worker for the state, while Barney was black and worked as an assistant dispatcher for the Boston Post Office. They were both active in civil rights organizations and their church, well respected in their community. They had been on a spontaneous vacation to Niagara Falls in Canada, and on September 19th, they were driving home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. They'd heard reports of an incoming hurricane, so they decided to drive through the night instead of stopping at a motel, hoping to reach home by around 3 a.m. at the latest. The route they took led them through the White Mountains of New Hampshire. It was rural, forested, and mountainous terrain. Not completely isolated, but certainly not populous. The roads were empty that night. They hadn't passed another car for quite some time. Despite the hurricane warnings, the night sky was clear and full of stars. They had stopped for a late dinner at a restaurant in Colebrook, leaving there around 10:05 p.m. About 25 minutes later, as they were driving just south of Lancaster, Betty noticed something unusual in the sky. She spotted a bright light in the southwestern sky, near the moon and what she believed was Jupiter. At first glance, she thought it might be a shooting star, but something didn't seem right. This star was moving upward, not falling as shooting stars do. She pointed it out to Barney, who was driving. He glanced at it briefly and suggested it might be a satellite that had gone off course.
So they spotted something unusual in the sky. What happened next?
As they continued driving, they both kept an eye on this strange light. It seemed to be getting larger and brighter, and Betty grew increasingly fascinated by it. She urged Barney to stop the car so they could get a better look. Being indulgent of his wife's curiosity, Barney pulled over, and they got out of the car. Betty brought along their dog, Delcy, a dachshund who seemed unusually quiet and subdued. They had a pair of 7x50 binoculars with them, which they used to view the object. Through the binoculars, they could see that the object was definitely moving. And not just moving in a straight line, it was changing course erratically, making sharp turns and stops that no conventional aircraft could manage. This is when Barney began to feel uncomfortable. He tried to rationalize what they were seeing, insisting it must be a commercial plane, or perhaps a military helicopter, but there was uncertainty in his voice. As they continued their journey, they stopped several more times to observe the object. Near Indian Head, they noticed the object was now to their right, and they were moving in opposite directions. But then something truly unsettling happened. The object appeared to turn around and begin moving in their direction. Betty had the distinct impression it was following them, tracking their car as they drove. During one of their stops, when the object passed in front of the moon, Betty got a clearer view through the binoculars. What she saw shocked her. It wasn't a point of light anymore, but what she described as a wingless, cigar-shaped craft, flashing a series of red, amber, blue, and green lights along its body. At this point, Betty openly suggested it might be a flying saucer. She'd heard about UFO sightings before, and in fact, her sister had claimed to have seen UFOs a few years earlier, on 2 separate occasions. Barney scoffed at this idea, becoming irritated at the very suggestion of alien spaceships. But privately, he was becoming increasingly troubled. The craft's strange movements, the complete lack of sound despite its proximity, and the feeling he was developing that they were being watched. All of this was beginning to unnerve him. Their dog began whining and cowering under the seat, as if afraid of something.
That must have been quite unnerving. How did they react to this unusual object?
Barney started to feel like he was being watched. Their dog began whining as if afraid. At one point, Barney even grabbed a pistol from his trunk. As they continued driving, the object flew behind Cannon Mountain, then reappeared and began following them. Eventually, when the object was only a few hundred feet in the air, Betty could see it through the binoculars and was startled to see what looked like a huge craft with rows of windows. Barney stopped the car near Indian Head, got out, and looked. The object swung toward them, not more than a city block away, and only about 2 treetops high, then began hovering silently in the air. Barney described it as a large glowing pancake that was larger than a jet airliner.
So they had a close view of this craft. What details could they make out?
The object swung in what they described as a perfect silent arc across the road a few hundred feet in front of Barney. He could clearly see the rows of windows wrapping around the craft. The object stopped over a field to his left, and Barney began walking toward it while Betty remained in the car. He noticed that the red lights on the sides of the object belonged to fin-like projections extending outward. Despite the craft's brilliant light, strangely no light fell on the ground. As the craft slowly descended toward him, Barney looked through his binoculars again. And this is where the story takes an even more extraordinary turn. Barney claimed he saw around 10 figures staring at him from the craft's window. He described them as humanoid, but somehow not human, wearing glossy black uniforms and black caps. Suddenly, all but one of the figures moved away from the windows toward what appeared to be a control board. The craft moved closer. The fins extended further, and some sort of ladder-like structure began to descend from the craft.
That sounds terrifying. How did they respond to such an alarming sight?
Barney was absolutely terrified. He recalled the slanted eyes of the remaining figures staring at him with intense concentration. He ran back to the car, jumped in, and drove away as fast as he could, yelling to Betty, "They're gonna capture us." As they drove away, Betty tried to watch the object but couldn't see it. And strangely, she couldn't see any stars in the sky either. Then they heard a series of irregular beeping noises that seemed to bounce off the trunk of their car. The car vibrated with each beep, and they felt a tingling sensation throughout their bodies. They became drowsy, and their awareness began to dull. Sometime later, they weren't sure how long. They heard a second series of beeping noises, and their awareness started returning, though they still felt foggy. They realized they were near Ashland, about 35 miles from where they had encountered the craft, but they had very little memory of having driven those 35 miles. They regained full consciousness sometime after that, though they were still groggy and disturbed. They didn't speak much for the rest of the drive, apart from agreeing not to discuss what had happened with others. They arrived home around 5 a.m., several hours later than expected, and immediately, they noticed several strange things. Both their watches had stopped and would never run again. The strap to their binoculars was inexplicably broken. Betty felt compelled to leave their luggage outside and throw away the food from their trip. Betty noticed her new dress was torn in several places and had a strange stain on it. The tops of Barney's shoes were scuffed, and he felt a strange need to examine his groin. When they tried to discuss their experience, they found they had difficulty recalling much of it, especially that period between the two series of beeps, when they had traveled 35 miles. Barney vaguely remembered a roadblock, and Betty recalled him making a sharp turn somewhere, but little else. Whisperance.
This experience clearly affected them deeply. How did they process what had happened to them?
Betty and Barney responded very differently initially. Betty was intensely curious and began talking about the incident with her sister just hours after it happened. Barney, however, entered a state of denial and preferred not to discuss it. On her sister's advice, Betty checked the car with a compass and found over a dozen shiny circular spots on the trunk, about the size of $50, as if the trunk had been polished in those spots. The compass needle moved abnormally when placed over these spots. They eventually reported their sighting to the Air Force, which was collecting UFO reports at the time, though they left out some of the more bizarre details. The report was passed on to Project Blue Book, the Air Force's study of UFOs. Interestingly, about 10 days after the incident, Betty began having a series of vivid, realistic dreams for 5 or 6 consecutive nights. A friend suggested these might be repressed memories and convinced Betty to write them down.
Did they seek any professional help to understand what happened during that missing time?
Yes, they did. Betty became obsessed with researching UFOs and contacted various UFO research organizations. The National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NECAP, sent Walter N. Webb, a lecturer at the Hayden Planetarium, to interview them. Despite his skepticism, Webb found their account remarkably consistent throughout a 6-hour interview. Later, an Air Force major and 2 scientists conducted an 11-hour interview with the Hills. During this interview, they realized the seriousness of their missing time. They should have been home by 2 or 3 a.m. but arrived at 5 a.m. Those missing hours became a focus of the investigation. The major suggested that medical hypnosis might help retrieve their memories. Although a psychiatrist initially advised against this, in December 1963, over 2 years after the incident, they finally consulted Dr. Benjamin Simon, a prominent psychiatrist and expert in hypnosis.
And what emerged during these hypnosis sessions?
Dr. Simon conducted hypnosis sessions with them every Saturday from February to June 1964. The Hills were hypnotized separately with the other out of the room, and Dr. Simon directed them not to remember anything they discussed under hypnosis, unless he specifically allowed it. Under hypnosis, they recalled a much more detailed and disturbing story. After Barney ran back to the car at Indian Head, they heard beeping sounds, became drowsy, and then Barney unexpectedly turned off the highway. They drove to a point where there was an orange glow in the road coming from the woods. In the road stood between 6 and 12 figures in dark uniforms. The car stalled, and the beings approached. Both Betty and Barney felt too dazed to react. The beings escorted them down a path to their ship. Barney with his eyes closed for much of this, feeling as if the leader had encouraged him to keep them closed. Betty recalled being angry and calling out to Barney, who appeared to be sleepwalking. One of the beings asked if Barney was his name. The being told Betty not to be afraid, saying they were only going to perform some tests and would return them safely. They described the beings as short, about 5 feet tall, with grayish skin, large craniums that diminished toward the chin, and large, slanted eyes with pupils that reminded Betty of cat's eyes.
What happened inside the craft according to their hypnosis sessions?
Guessed. They were taken to separate rooms inside the craft. Barney recalled being laid on a metallic table resembling an operating table in a pie-shaped room, with sky blue walls. Betty's description was similar but more detailed. She noticed other furniture and equipment. Both described physical examinations. Barney recalled the beings examining his body, opening his mouth, and scratching his arm with something like a stick. He also remembered a cup being placed around his groin. Betty's examination was more elaborate. They took samples of her skin, earwax, hair, and fingernails. They examined her nervous system with a device that looked like a cluster of needles with wires. Finally, they inserted a long needle into her navel, which was painful until the leader placed his hand over her eyes, after which the pain disappeared. Betty had extensive conversations with the leader. She asked for proof of the encounter to take back with her, and found a large book written in an unfamiliar script. When she asked where they were from, the leader showed her a star map with dots and lines connecting them. Betty would later try to recreate this map from memory. The beings seemed puzzled by Barney's dentures and asked Betty questions about aging, food, and various Earth concepts, each question leading to more questions.
How did this experience end according to their recovered memories?
The beings told Betty and Barney they could leave and escorted them halfway to their car. Betty was initially allowed to take the book with her, but the leader took it back before they parted, explaining that it would be better if they forgot the encounter. The leader suggested they watch the craft leave. They observed it become a glowing orange ball that grew brighter and brighter before taking off and disappearing within seconds. The Hills felt a strange elation at this point. Barney started the car and drove back toward Route 3. Then they heard the second series of beeps, which brought them back to the point in the story where they had better conscious memory. Interestingly, about 4 months later, an almost geometrically perfect circle of warts developed around Barney's groin, which later became inflamed again during the hypnosis sessions.
How did these hypnosis sessions affect them?
Dr. Simon eventually allowed them to remember what they had revealed under hypnosis and to hear their own recordings. Though emotionally difficult, they described the experience as having chains lifted from their shoulders. Dr. Simon wasn't sure what to make of their story. He was struck by how consistent their accounts were with each other, and he didn't believe it was a hoax or a product of mental illness. However, he wasn't convinced the incident had happened exactly as they claimed. His hypothesis was that the portion of the story recovered under hypnosis may have developed in their minds after seeing an unexplained object in the sky, rather than being actual memories. He suspected Betty's dreams might have influenced Barney's recollections.
What happened after these sessions? Did they share their story publicly?
Initially, they tried to keep their story private, but in 1965, reporters somehow obtained recordings of a talk they had given to their church group and began publishing articles about their experience. Frustrated by the sensationalist and inaccurate reporting, they decided to tell their story publicly themselves. They gave talks about their incident and appeared on radio and television shows. In 1966, they worked with John G. Fuller on the book The Interrupted Journey, which made their case famous. Barney Hill died from a stroke in 1969 at age 46. Betty lived until 2004, dying at age 85. She never remarried and remained steadfast in her story, becoming active in the UFO community.
What makes this case so significant in UFO history?
The Betty and Barney Hill case wasn't the first claimed alien abduction, but it was the first to receive widespread attention. It essentially made the concept of alien abductions famous. Similarly, their description of the beings, what would later be called the Greys, became the predominant image of aliens in popular culture. The case has been extensively analyzed for decades. Physical evidence like Betty's dress, which had an unidentified pink powder and stain, was examined by multiple laboratories. Betty's star map was studied by astronomers trying to identify the star system the beings might have come from. Critics have offered alternative explanations, that they misidentified conventional objects like aircraft warning beacons, that they were suffering from sleep deprivation after driving for 21 hours, or that Betty's interest in UFOs influenced her perceptions and eventually Barney's as well. Betty's later claims of numerous UFO sightings, some quite spectacular, damaged her credibility with some researchers. However, the core story remains compelling because of the Hills' consistent accounts, their credible backgrounds, and the physical evidence they presented.
Thank you for sharing this remarkable story with us. The Betty and Barney Hill case continues to challenge our understanding of reality and reminds us that there are experiences in this world that defy simple explanation. What strikes me most about their story is the profound impact it had not just on them personally, but on our collective imagination. Whether you believe they encountered beings from another world or experienced something else entirely, there's no denying that their courage in sharing their story opened a space for conversations about the unknown. In many ways, that's what Lighthouse is all about, creating a space where extraordinary experiences can be shared without judgment, where we can explore the mysteries that illuminate the boundaries of our understanding. If you've experienced something you can't explain, remember that you're not alone. There are others who have walked similar paths, and sharing these stories helps all of us navigate the unknown together. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, keep your light shining even in the darkest waters.